Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you for those who did show up on time. I don't want to punish those people who were here on time, right? So thank you for coming this morning. My name is Laurie Rhea. I am the Privacy and Disclosure Officer at the California Franchise Tax Board, and I have been with Franchise Tax Board for about 27 years. And I've been in this role with privacy and disclosure for about 10 years. And I have the great privilege to work with Alea.
I'm Alea Garbagnati. I'm a senior consultant at Deloitte. I've been at Deloitte for 2 years, and I work in the cyber risk services practice as part of the privacy and data protection program. What we do is we go to organizations and we do privacy risk assessments to determine how different privacy programs are operating and whether where there's room for improvement. We also help develop and implement the tools that are needed to help address any identified gaps or observations.
So you'll notice that we don't have a PowerPoint set up. We're just going to have a conversation. We encourage you to ask questions as we go along. We're going to be talking about how privacy and security can and should work together, and how you might move forward to getting to that place if they're not already working together in your organization. Okay?
So I'll kick it off. So privacy and security are increasingly core tenets of an organization's operating environment. This is a result of a number of factors. For one, recent high-profile breaches in big organizations have brought this conversation into the mainstream and have turned privacy and security into household conversations. As a result, there have been a number of laws and regulations that have been both passed recently and are in development that are going to bolster this ever-changing legal landscape. Big data is also a big buzzword I'm sure everyone's been hearing a lot, and that's turned personal information into an important business asset. Information such as who you are, where you live, and what you do have turned into valuable commodities for both public and private organizations.
We're certainly seeing that, Alea. At the Franchise Tax Board, we're currently working on a project that is all about the data, right? And as we move into the ever-changing technology and more technology-enabled systems and business processes, we're collecting more and more data, and we're walking that very fine line between we can collect it, we have the legal authority to collect it and use it, but should we? Right? So that fine line between get it all and impinging upon people's privacy rights.
And this is something that you see at a lot of organizations. A lot of these organizations have the capabilities to collect and use a lot of information. And sometimes it is about finding that fine line between using this valuable commodity to the extent that you need to for your organization, and also bringing back and applying the limits that are in place because of the relevant laws and regulations. And so privacy and security, they often go hand in hand, as you can tell from the name of our talk. They serve different purposes, but you can't have one without the other. And an effective program incorporates aspects of both concepts. On the privacy side of a program, you're addressing the rights of the data subject. So this is where you look into concepts of and obligations for notice, choice, consent, transparency, and accountability as information is being collected, used, disclosed, and disposed of in the organization. Security, on the other hand, involves a safeguarding of personal information. Unlike privacy, this is more the how rather than the what. This concept addresses issues such as access management, authentication, and other components to preserve the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of personal information. So these different concepts, they differ in many respects, and they have different operating models, but they both ultimately go to the same goal, which is appropriately handling personal information and data assets. They work together, and you cannot have an effective program without one or the other. These concepts, however, are not just the conversation of just the organization. Privacy and security are everyone's business. The common adage that a chain is only as strong as its weakest link applies here just as much as it does anywhere else. You need to let your employees know about privacy and security updates, let them know about how your program is working, and make sure that they know that they too have a stake in the organization.
really important. As far as the allowing or providing employees with the education, right, the awareness, key. I think that's really key. People don't understand how the policies and the tenets and the tools and technologies apply to their business processes, then they will not understand their part in it, right? So awareness and education is key. So how does an organization get to this place of working together, right? I want to kind of give you just a little bit of a scenario from Franchise Tax Board from history, okay? So about 10 years ago and prior to that, our information security operation was really kind of behind the doors, right? They were in their own secured suite, and they were very, very focused on ensuring that technology was in place to protect the data. And about 10 years ago then, our Chief Security Officer, who many of you may know, Denise Malore, she assumed responsibility for the information security component, the physical security component, as well as what we call the disclosure office. So we now are one family: information security, physical security, and disclosure, which another word for disclosure is privacy, okay? And we're all now one family. Denise's main operating principle was, we are one family and we will collaborate. Okay, so we were immediately put into that role where we always talk with our brothers in security, and my staff always work with the security folks. The other thing that really was key, I think, to our success, and so far as now we are fully integrated, is that both functions, privacy and security, are very close to the top of the organization. We report to Denise, our Chief Security Officer. Denise then reports directly to the Chief of Admin Division and the Chief of the IT Division, our CIO, and directly to the Executive Officer. We have very little bureaucratic mumbo-jumbo, if you will, to get through in order to get face time with the senior executives and to get the support from the senior executives and the buy-in that we need. It's very important that we all have a seat at the table. So when you're thinking about privacy and security working together, it only works if the business areas understand that both security and privacy will be at the table in all of their business process reengineering, new business process introduction, projects, IT projects that come up. So in our organization, thankfully, all of our projects include a privacy and security component right up front.
And just to elaborate a little more on what Laurie said, privacy and security, these programs aren't buckets, and information, as it's going through an organization, it's going to hit a number of business processes and business areas. So it is really important to make sure that you have the process area buy-in as you're baking privacy and security into different initiatives and different programs. So we wanted to go over a couple of tenets of governance and kind of walk through a couple of different controls and how privacy and security can work together in these areas. So in order to appropriately protect and safeguard personal information, it is important to have a governance program that oversees how personal information is handled throughout the data life cycle. So this means that you're looking at how personal information is being managed and safeguarded from the time that it's created or collected to the time that you're ultimately disposing, destroying, archiving that information. Both privacy and security plays a role for a number of the controls that you're looking into in these different phases. So let's start off with the first one. When you're collecting and creating personal information, this is the area from a privacy perspective that you need to be very transparent about how this information is being used. So this is where you're going to be providing the privacy notice to the data subjects whose information you're collecting. So typically these notices will contain information about how you're using the information right now, if you're planning on using it for other reasons later, who you're disclosing this information to, what safeguards you're putting in place, and who you can contact in the organization if there are any complaints, questions, or anything else. And this is also the phase where as you're required, you need to get consent from the appropriate data subjects. So security, they come into play because your notice can say as much as you want about how secure personal information is in the organization, but you can't, it's not going to be nothing if you don't have the security controls in place to back up what you're saying. So you need to make sure that not only do you have this written documentation that talks about everything in the notice, you need to have the controls to back it up and to make sure that as information is coming in, it's safeguarded and protected. So, for example, if you're collecting information over email, you need to make sure that you're either encrypting the email services or you're using some other secure mechanism, such as a secure FTP site or anything else, to make sure that it is secure as it's coming in. And Laurie can provide a couple examples of how this works.
Yeah, so currently at Franchise Tax Board, again, I'm kind of the example person. Thank you for the theory, Alea. At FTB, we have secure email. Okay, it's well established. We use it with taxpayers. We use it with taxpayers' representatives every single day. We use it in audits. We use it for collections. We use it in all of our programs. What it does not allow us to do, however, is it doesn't allow the taxpayer, the citizen, to initiate that secure email. So we don't encourage data to come into us via email. If somebody sends it in, once we have it, we definitely do protect it. What we can do is when we have an ongoing relationship with someone, we establish a secure email. So we initiate a secure email to the taxpayer. The taxpayer can then reply within that secure email string in order to provide the information. When we're providing large volumes of data, we also have a very secure web interface file transfer protocol in place that we use to exchange files of data with our exchange partners. The other thing that we have that's kind of cool, a taxpayer can go to our website and decide or choose to chat with an agent. So we have agents that do nothing but chat. Right, and they can have a chat session about general tax information. So where can I get this form? How can I complete this document? How do I calculate this? General information. The minute that the taxpayer indicates that they want to talk about something specific to them, the agent then puts them into a secure chat session. So now that chat session is encrypted, and the agent must authenticate the individual before they do any further communicating with them. So it's a great tool. We have a lot of taxpayers opting for that. Certainly as our tax-paying, citizenry gets younger, they're opting for much more technology than, let me call and stay on the phone for 30 minutes, right? The other thing that I wanted to talk about was that secure email function. In 2015, part of our Enterprise Data to Revenue project includes implementing a functionality that will allow a taxpayer to upload documents securely. So they'll be able to authenticate into our system, look at their tax account, send us, or upload a document securely. So we're really looking forward to that too, and we think that that technology will really enable taxpayers to more self-serve.
And so then to provide another example of an area where privacy and security both have the same ultimate goal and they are using the same sort of concepts, a common privacy component is to make sure that you are using and collecting information to the minimum extent necessary. So as information is coming in and as you're trying to determine what information you need to collect, you should be developing data inventories and identifying exactly what sort of information you need to collect for your business process. And this is another area where getting the buy-in and the feedback from business process owners is a key component. So this is where you start considering things such as, if you're looking at tax information, for example, do you really need to be collecting health information? Do you need to collect all the sorts of other information that might not necessarily be useful for what you're doing? And this is important, from an efficiency standpoint, but also because the more information that you're collecting and bringing into your organization, the more that puts you at risk. If you have a data breach, then there's more information that might be compromised, and that scenario. So you want to bring in as little information as you need to run what you're doing. From a security perspective, identifying what information you're bringing into the organization plays an important role as well, because as you're identifying what's coming in, you need to identify what appropriate safeguards you're putting in place to protect the data. So not all data is created equal. A security safeguard for something that you might see on your business card, for example, is not the sort of security safeguard that you're going to put in place for health information. So it really identifying and building tools such as data classification policies and procedures, or developing a data inventory really helps you identify and key into what data you're bringing in and how you need to protect it. So both privacy and security have a stake in these instances.
That's right. And, yeah.
A quick question. So my question is, so what types of privacy policies are a must-have? You talked about data classification being one already, but other policies? No.
We typically recommend third-party management policies, and we're going to speak a little bit to third-party a little later on. Data classification, you need your privacy policies and procedures, not just for external customers and data, but also for internal operations. So you need something that's facing both externally and internally for your customers and employees. I would also recommend data, like social media policies, to make sure that if you are collecting information, you need to make sure that it's implemented in those policies, not to share the information that you're collecting with the outside and the public. Disaster management, business continuity policies are also different policies where you have both privacy and security having a stake in the policies. Those are just a few that I can name off the top of my head, but generally we're looking towards we recommend a lot of different policies to help build everything out.
And the other thing, Alea mentioned third parties, and when you collect information, making certain that as you bring it into your organization, it is secured. Access management, access controls, cannot stress enough about how important those are. And this is really, if you can tell back and forth, you cannot have privacy without security. So if I put privacy policies in place in our organization without communicating with my security folks and talking to them every single day about every single issue and every single policy, then I can't ensure that whatever security measures we put in place, they're going to meet and support our policies. Really key here. We have access at FTB to, billions and billions of records from the IRS, okay? Tons of data from the IRS. It's tax data. We need it in our programs. The IRS comes in and does audits of us every 3 years. If we do not have all of those security safeguards in place to meet those requirements, we could lose access to that data. So it's absolutely critical, especially if you're using third-party data, right, that you put all of the security controls in place that support your policies. Okay, we certainly don't want to lose access to that federal data. It generates about $1 billion a year for the state. Very important data. So anyway, just another example of how critical it is that you keep the security and privacy working together.
And just to build a little off of what Laurie is saying, when you're as I was talking about earlier, you want to collect and bring in as little information as you want. You also want to limit your access to as little people who need that information to that role. The more people who have access, the more room you have for human error or any other mistakes that might cause a data breach or make you lose the information. So it's typical to have organizations frequently monitor who has access to systems that contain personal information and identify, so do all of these people need access to this information? If they don't, you should be terminating and restricting that access, and also making sure, okay, so someone changes their role, someone leaves the company, you need to make sure that you're frequently checking these to make sure that those employees or former employees no longer have access to that information.
And that's really important too, because from a privacy perspective, if I don't have business folks working on my privacy policies who understand the business processes, then somebody could say, oh, my folks need access. Well, no, they really don't. They really may not, right? The business thinks they do, and we're all about the big data. Everybody wants everything, right? But maintaining the least privilege, the least privilege is the best.
Quick question. So you mentioned tax, so special publication 1075 is a play there. Are there any additional mandates such as maybe NIST best practices as well?
Yeah, the 1075 is based on NIST,
Okay.
800-53. So everything that we put in place, although we have a portion of the data that we use for our programs that is federally regulated and requirements apply specific to that data, we actually take that NIST 800-53 for moderate level and apply it to everything. All of our confidential tax data.
Okay, and so we mentioned third parties a little bit earlier. Third parties, this is a huge, huge thing these days. It's whether you're disclosing information to another organization, whether you're using a third-party service provider to handle your information, having third-party and vendor management policies and procedures in place is incredibly important, and both privacy and security have a stake in this. So I tend to look at this as you're looking at how you're managing third parties before, during, and after the relationship. So before the relationship, you need to look and do your due diligence on both the privacy and security practices of the third party that you're disclosing information to. Often what we recommend is having both the privacy and security checklists in place, so you have the considerations that you want, the areas that you think might create more risk, and you look at how the third party's program is in place. Okay, so they have this, they don't have this, and this helps you identify the level of risk that this third party has, so you can appropriately safeguard what's going to those third parties. And many privacy laws do speak to this. Many privacy laws do recommend and require that as you're disclosing personal information to third parties, that they have the appropriate safeguards in place and that you're monitoring. So before the relationship, you're also putting into contracts, okay, well, from a privacy perspective, the third party cannot disclose personal information to other third parties unless X or Y happen. Or from a security standpoint, you need to make sure, okay, well, they have their security program either as good or better than our own organization. And if they don't, then they need to put those controls in place. During the relationship, you need to make sure that you're monitoring from both a privacy and a security perspective how their organization is actually speaking to their working and doing what they say in the contract. So this is where doing risk audits or risk assessments of the third party becomes an essential part. And then after the relationship, you need to make sure that they either return the information back to your organization in a secure manner, or they're securely destroying the information and that they don't have it unless there's it's something that crosses over.
Right. And so we have an extensive set of data exchange contracts in place at Franchise Tax Board. We share data, and so we either send it out or get it in, right, in about, 200 plus contracts, okay? So lots of data moving around. And what we are required to do, and what we, our well-established process consists of, is a group of people that includes legal, our procurement area, the disclosure office, myself, the privacy officer, our information security area, and then we have a group called the data resources folks. And they get together to ensure that our contracts contain very strong safeguard language. So for example, we have requirements on certain level of protections. So we require people to be, NIST compliant or close to it. And if they're not in certain areas, we talk about mitigating controls, compensating controls, those kinds of things. Retention, how long can they keep it and what do they need to do with it when that retention period is up? And they need to tell us that they're destroying data and in what matter. We reserve the right to perform on-site audits. So in every data exchange contract, we require that the third party allow us to come on site. In addition, every third party, before the contract is ever signed, must complete a security questionnaire. And that security questionnaire allows us to do a risk assessment before we ever enter into the agreement. So it allows us to look at what they've got in place and make sure that we're comfortable with that. One thing about sharing information with a third party when it's legally authorized, right, is that it does not release the data owner or the data steward, FTB in this case, of accountability and responsibility. It's my responsibility to make sure that that data is secure. And if I'm sharing it with for example, if I'm sharing data with EDD, right, so that they can do their tax programs, it's my responsibility to make sure that I'm working very closely with EDD to ensure they've got the right controls in place. And I know that they do because we are very closely linked.
And that's often something that does come up as well, where a company might look at, okay, well, we have our HR data being processed by another organization, we don't have to worry about that, but that it's the opposite. You need to make sure that you are constantly or monitoring how they're using the data to make sure that this is the data that you are responsible for, so you need to make sure that that data is properly safeguarded and properly used.
This is a company, I want to validate that too, because although they lose manageability, they still have to maintain accountability. And so it's a conversation between legal and security to make sure that it's written in the contract. So the question I was going to ask is, do you require the third party to produce the results of the SAS 70 Type 2 audits as well to ensure that they're aligning with the controls that you guys have?
We don't, because we go in and work very closely with them, and because we've got our own security questionnaires going on and the safeguard questionnaires and ongoing dialogues. If we're doing, for example, if we're engaging with a vendor for services, we may require those types of reports. We basically are looking at, are you NIST compliant, NIST 800-53, moderate level compliant, FIPS, all of the and now as we look at the cloud issues, right, there's another level of compliance and certification and security that people have to have in place, that FedRAMP and everything else. So we don't necessarily require all of their reports, but they do have to certify certain things.
Is it a manual process now? Are you looking at automation?
For
just the whole assessment, a portion, you mentioned every 3 years, the audit happens. Is there any type of tools that you're looking at?
The IRS uses certain tools,
Okay.
definitely. In fact, they put one into place and then very quickly realized it doesn't work like they thought it should work. So they're changing. But as far as us going into a third party, we do that manually.
And Laurie mentioned cloud. I just wanted to kind of elaborate on this point a little bit. There was a study recently. Many organizations, I think it was almost 3/4 of the organizations interviewed in Europe, they don't believe that cloud services currently are up to par with their security. So from that standpoint, cloud service providers, they are a third party, so you do need to make sure that they are safeguarding your information.
So I talked a little bit about our contract development, our data exchange contract development, and part of that is about governance, right? We have a very strong process in place, and so I wanted to just talk a little bit about the governance structure that we have at Franchise Tax Board. And a picture would be a bazillion words right now, so I'm sorry I don't have a picture. I'd be glad to share those with you. If you want to leave me a card, I'm more than happy to share those with you later. At Franchise Tax Board, we have a very well-functioning, well-greased machine, if you will. Our executive officer is extremely reliant upon her executive team. We have a governance council, which is made up of the division chiefs in our organization, which includes our CIO, and it includes Denise Malore, who's our chief security officer. The governance council then kind of serves as an oversight body, if you will, for action committees. These action committees are line focused. So kind of a better way to say that is we have a technology action committee. We have a customer service action committee. We have an internal business action committee, and we have a privacy and security action committee. So as you can see, that just by the name and the virtue of that committee, we already have privacy and security very much aligned. right? So issues that come up in the department, they go to a specific action committee depending on what the issue is. That action committee then resolves the issue, works out the process, and sends it up for approval or blessing, if you will, at the governance level, the governance council level. The interesting thing is, and I think why this works so well, is that every one of those action committees is made up of representatives from every division in the department. So every issue, regardless of what committee it goes to, is looked at from all perspectives, okay? The whole, every side. So if there's an issue that crosses action committees, it's okay, because those action committee chairs get together and share the issues. So it works, it's a very, very profitable, very sound governance model.
And this is something that we spoke to earlier in the talk. Privacy and security, information, these aren't islands, and this information is traveling throughout the organization. So getting buy-in and having groups work together to provide their input on how information is managed, where information needs to go, having this input throughout the process from beginning to end really helps you bake in privacy and security to how you're developing program and implementing different programs.
And in order for the governance to work, you've got to have very clearly defined roles and responsibilities, right? So roles and responsibilities, when we talk about, what's the role of privacy? What's the role of security, right? The role and responsibilities of privacy are the what, right? What do we need to do? The policies, the processes, the standards around that policy, right? The people, training the people, making everybody aware. Whereas security, the roles and responsibilities of security are much more focused on the technologies, tools, if you will, the standards that you have to follow, what exactly the nits and the tools, right, the technologies, in order to support those policies. And as we keep saying, you can't have one without the other. Privacy is one side of the coin, security is the other side of the coin, and you've got to have them working together. Otherwise, I don't know that those tools and technologies are going to help us support and meet our policies, right?
Exactly, and it's one thing to have the strongest policies and procedures out there that say what you're doing. It's another thing if you can't have the tools and technologies in place to back up what you're saying. Not having that disconnect is incredibly bad from a governance standpoint. Additionally, just making sure that your staff is educated about who takes on these different roles and responsibilities in the organization is incredibly important. So for example, in the event of a data breach, if the staff doesn't know who to reach out to, it impedes how this information is traveling throughout the organization, and it might affect how you're triaging or responding to any data breach or loss of information.
Right. Yeah, really important point that you define those roles and responsibilities, not only from a general privacy and security perspective, but also how do those players, those actors, react, or what role do they serve in a data incident, right? So very, very important.
Yes. And this actually also goes back to an earlier point too, where as you're determining what information you're bringing in, certain laws and regulations, depending on what information you're collecting and using, they may require that you appoint certain individuals within the organization as well. So for example, going back to the health information example, if you're regulated by HIPAA, you're going to need to appoint a HIPAA security and a HIPAA privacy officer as well. So knowing what information is coming in also helps you define the roles and responsibilities for how your program is going to look.
Right. So where do you start?
So where to start? Regardless of where you are with your privacy and security programs, it's essential that you build a bridge between the two. So as we said earlier, your privacy program can be anywhere in the organization. You need to make sure that that communication is starting or has started already. And you can't have one without the other. As we've gone through several different controls in several different areas where you need to work together to make sure that information is safeguarded and used properly. Both programs are going towards the same goal, and both programs don't want you to have that loss of data and an improper response to the data that might create financial, regulatory, or reputational damage to your organization. So if your privacy and security programs aren't working together, right now is the time to start taking that step towards building that bridge and making sure that those communications are in place. So your program should start reaching out to each other to get insight into what the other program is doing. And this is incredibly important. I've worked with organizations where that communication is not there, and that even from an assessment perspective, we weren't getting information that we needed because one part of the program thought that they provided someone else that had the information. They thought someone else was responsible for that role or responsibility, and there was a disconnect there. So some key elements or important elements as you're building these programs and developing your privacy and security programs, you need to get support from the top executives of the organization. They're the ones who have the resources to help you get to where you need to go, and they're the ones that have that push to also get you to where you need to go and to also build that bridge. As we've highlighted many times in this presentation, getting support and buy-in from the business level is also critical as you're building these programs. They're the ones that know how or why information is coming into the organization. They know how that information needs to be used. So getting that information in is important from the privacy perspective, and it's also important because you from the privacy and security perspective can help them bake in these safeguards from the get-go. To start building these bridges and to start planning out your programs, you also need to have the appropriate planning in place. You need to have a solid foundation and a plan so that you know your timelines, you know your goals and your responsibilities, so you can keep yourself on track as you're developing these programs. And finally, you need to have reasonable expectations for how you're going to build these programs. It's not going to happen in a day. It's going to take time. There may be some frustration. There may be other concerns that get in the way. But you need to have that patience to know that ultimately where you're going is going to help bring your program together and help you get to the goal that both your programs want to get to.
That's right. And I think that the reasonable expectations is a really important point. Franchise Tax Board, I'm very comfortable that we have a very good working model in place, but it certainly didn't happen overnight, and we still are building better and better relationships and making things better as we go. I do kind of want to, we'll have time for some questions, I think, but I do kind of want to leave you with a little bit of a call to action, if you will. I think that in order to protect the state of California and the assets that we have to be on point with this privacy and security link. You cannot have one without the other. The state government, every branch of state government, we're all looking at, we're getting more and more data. We want to use it more effectively. We want to generate more revenue. We also want to be extremely cognizant of the privacy rights of our citizens. And part of that is transparency, and the state's doing a really good job at working toward that transparency. But I just kind of want to leave you with just a couple key words, if you will, key action items. Communicate, right? We always hear about communication with everything we do. Communicate with your business areas. Communicate with your privacy or security counterparts. Communicate with your executives often, right? Cooperate, right? Cooperation to me means I'm going to go to a meeting in their area. I'm going to go down to the coffee bar and meet with them to chat about their business process. That will enable them to know me. I'm not this scary Darth Vader creature, right? If anyone was in that presentation this morning. We're not here to instill fear. What I want to do is establish those relationships that Alea talked about, right? So that we're all cooperating, working toward the same goal, and collaborate. If we can collaborate on these projects, security and privacy together, we bake it in instead of having to bolt it on. And it's much more cost effective and presents a much better face and much better feeling for our constituents, right? If it is baked in and they can see it and they trust, right? Instilling trust and maintaining that privacy is so important, and we cannot do it without our IT, our security folks backing us up. Okay. So we can open it up to questions or comments or
I've asked all my.
input. Russ?
Sorry.
How are you?
Hey, great, thanks.
So I got a question. So my observation over doing this for a while, security, people that have come up through the traditional information security track and maybe started in technology and infrastructure and evolved in information security are oriented very differently than folks from privacy. It might as well be security folks are from Mars, privacy folks are from Venus. What has been some experiences of how to actually get the security folks understanding, at least trying to understand privacy, and then privacy folks trying to understand the world of security?
Yeah. What I have found to be extremely helpful, because you're certainly right, and I go into meetings still, and I've been doing this for 10 years, I still will sit down at the meeting at a table with some of our IT security guys, and I'm just like, what? It's like they're speaking a language I have no idea what it is sometimes. And I think that the idea that, from my perspective, I'm much more a business person. So I need to be humble. I need to ask questions. I need to be open to the idea that, okay, you know what? I'm going to provide you with this basis. This is the base level policy, and I'm going to just ask you to help me figure out how to do this. Really important to understand that balance between the what and the how. I'm going to provide you the what I need you to do, and if you guys can help me figure out how to do that, I would really love that, right? So, I've really taken, and I have had my staff really adopt this idea that we don't have the answers. We need our IT security brothers to help us. So that's kind of been our experience. That's what I have instilled in my staff. And I think that's what's enabled us to be successful so far.
And I think also, just to expand on that a little bit, having the different groups know what you're talking about and know the different terminologies also helps bring a level of understanding to the conversation. So for example, let's take access as an example. Access means a very different thing for privacy and security. For security, you're thinking access management, you're thinking granting rights and taking rights away. From a privacy perspective, access is allowing people to access the information that you have about them and to say, okay, well, this information that you're holding in your systems, that's wrong, you need to update my address, you need to update this information. So making sure both sides know what you're talking about is also critical as you're addressing and bringing the two groups together.
Is there a question in the back?
Well, I have one question. First of all, great presentation. Glad the franchise tax board is up to speed. One of the questions I hear circling around the citizens here in California is the whole DMV possible exposure with the third-party credit payment level on your bank for. And DMV came out, clearly stated there was no breach internal to the DMV. But the rest of California is still kind of waiting on everyone's comment of deniability or saying that they had. And when you talked about transparency and trust, with our third party, from a California perspective, that seems to be a gap that's still present because it's been since January and we see data breaches in Target and Home Depot. Less than 60 days, we are able to get some relevancy. And we haven't had that from our own state. And it's kind of a talking point I've noticed that's starting to bubble up. Is that something you guys are even concerned about or
Concerned, sure. I'm not going to speak specifically about the DMV issue because I don't work at DMV and I don't claim to understand that situation. I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that, and that's fine. What I would say is, I think that the issue that we have is this, the fact that information is instantaneous now, right? You look back several years before we had Twitter and the internet was so prevalent and our cell phones were basically attached on our foreheads or, never without them, right? You're never unconnected. So I think that sometimes the posture of the government has to be extremely cautious. And so again, it's kind of a balancing act, right? Do we exercise caution or do we exercise open transparency and possibly alarm a lot of people unnecessarily. It's like with a notification issue, right? If you have a breach, how do you know when to notify, right? Do you notify before you've done any investigation because somebody says you have to do it within 24 hours? Or do you wait maybe 2 days until you can get a little bit more information, right? So it's a very delicate balancing act, and I don't think we've perfected that.
Yeah, and I think your point is accurate and well taken. My concern that I think is that transparency between that third-party maintainer, because the DMV does seem to be clear on what they stated, but we're not, what you were speaking about is that we're going out to this master service agreement to a third party, a credit card, which all of us online are subjected to. We're not hearing back from that side, and the accountability seems to lie back to the DMV again, simply because they hired it.
Yeah.
That's that concern.
Yeah, and I think that, that's kind of a contractual thing too. If there's incident response processes and procedures and restrictions or requirements that are put into a contract, that's where you have to go back to that contract issue.
So that's my question. Is there a master level agreement from our state, from all our agencies when we go out to third party or cloud? Or are we individual agencies, there's no shared service agreement? Because I think that's the underlying issue, right? If we, like you guys are up to date, it sounds like we have a trusted service with you guys, whether it's on chat or payments. But if the DMV isn't, or maybe Department of Veteran Affairs, military stuff's getting out there now, that's a concern. So do we have a master, or is there something being worked on from the foundational level?
And I don't know that at the state as a whole level. I can certainly, I will certainly be following up on that, though.
I know Florida just passed a huge state jump leapfrog just a few weeks ago on this whole matter of the cybersecurity. I wonder where our posture is.
Yeah, I would imagine that at the state level, there are some pretty strict requirements to get onto, for example, that master service agreement list, right, the CMAS. I think there's probably some pretty high hoops that the organizations have to jump through in order to be on that list. So, but again, I'm not a contract expert, and I don't claim to have all the answers about CMAS, for sure.
Last question for you from FTV. How often do you perform audits for your security to validate your third parties? Is there a regular schedule?
Yes, yes. So I'm going to give you one example. We have a contractor who collects what we deem to be kind of an uncollectible case. Okay, so it gets to a point in our system where we just can't make any more progress, right? So we outsource those to a collection agency, and we will go to that collection agency every other year. So we're in a contract for 2 years with a possible extension for another year, and we will go to that vendor every other year.
As you build your security and privacy program, what type of relationship do you have with IT? They handle this.
I'm sorry, I was getting kind of moving on. Yeah, we're going to have to, I'll take that offline. Okay, can we talk about that afterwards? Because I think we're at the end.
We're out of time.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry.